You are tuned into the Power Chord Hour right here on 1079 WRFA and on the Power Chord Hour podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Merchant, joining you on this one. And we have two guys right now who just released one of my favorite records of 2022 so far, just 2 days ago. So right now we got Rory Phillips and we got Jamie Woolford of the Stereo. They're here to talk their brand new album 13, their Kings of No Hope podcast series, lots of which, I mean, like a year ago, would not have expected so much stereo stuff to talk about. But here we are with a lot of it to talk about. So new music, new podcasts, all that stuff. Rory, Jamie, how you guys doing?
Amazingly, I'm doing fantastically, and thank you for holding up the show for me. I was outside with my son just a minute ago chasing spiders, so doing some really rock and roll stuff in between these interviews. So.
Priorities.
And I've been busy all week planting spiders at Jamie's house in the pool area, so it's been a rough week for me, but I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, well,
blasted Rory.
Thank you time of your busy spider schedules to be here, talk about a brand new record. And I mean, Rory, this is your first time on the show. Jamie, we had you on. It's hard to believe it's almost been a year, but we had you on like July of last year.
Hard to believe you wanted me back. I mean, with all the cursing and my viewpoints on the bank systems, and that's just really controversial stuff.
You do remember? I think you credited yourself for creating glam rock. If I'm not mistaken, I think last time I did. I think you broke the news here about creating glam rock.
Right.
Kind of giving David Bowie his thing and all that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I actually do remember this now. My comedy, the memory of my comedy has a very short expiration period, and
who could forget that?
Probably best left that way, right?
But I mean, since then, I mean, it has been almost a year. Is the new Stereo album? Is that what you've been keeping busy with since we last spoke? Just getting this out? Has that been what you've been doing since I guess last July?
I mean, absolutely. Like, last July, right? We were still sort of keeping everybody's collective head in the sand, pandemic wise, and how we thought to do the release of our record was kind of a constant discussion, and always met with, okay, but then how are we gonna do that? Nobody's leaving their home. It's just like it's difficult enough just to try to release an album, right, to people and hopefully have them pay attention to it, and then having that sort of complication, that ripple in the that wrinkle in the fabric of everything, just made it was somewhat paralyzing, because we were just like, well, we don't know what to do. I guess we have to just kind of wait and see what we're going to do here. But in some respects, it actually forced us into ideas that maybe, I know personally I probably wouldn't have considered before. And thanks to kind of Rory's encouragement about doing our Kickstarter and crowdfunding, we ended up kind of landing there, and it ended up being the best possible thing that we could have done for our band, and for, like our fans have sort of like responded in this like amazing way, and pledged so much support behind us and our record and our podcasts, that it all really just worked out in the end for us. And so we're just like, wow, this is fantastic. So hindsight being 2020, like this went beautifully, and let's go ahead and just say that that's what we intended all along.
And the glacial pace of the Stereo, like we had already been moving super slow since getting this whole thing started, from conception to actually starting to take steps towards making it a reality. And then you add the pandemic into that, it's like the glacier just completely froze, and we just hit total entropy for a brief period of time. But yeah, luckily you found their way to fight out of it.
And it is funny, you're just talking about the Kickstarter. I mean, I wanted you guys back on when the new album was coming out, and originally I was like, they're doing a Kickstarter, it's probably a good time to have them on. But by the time I went to even ask you, you needed no help. There was zero help needed.
Yeah. We funded in 20 minutes. We funded our initial goal, and it was like, okay, now we had all this preparation to do what it was that we were trying to do, and then it just happened. And 20 minutes later, we're like, well, now what do we do for like the rest of the month that we planned on trying to like fight people into corners to help us, But it ended up turning into this thing where like, well, okay, now that we have a little bit of sort of like clarity of what the connection is that we have with our fans, now let's try to see if we can sweeten the pot for them and entertain ideas that we've talked about, kind of like, well, yeah, but we'd never be able to kind of pull that off. We can't do a gatefold, or we can't probably get together and make this like concert film type thing. And now we're doing it. You know what I mean? Like the fans were like, we want everything that you're saying here. We want this. So here, take this, and we want it. So we're like, okay. And it was just like this overwhelmingly heartwarming thing for us to like feel the response and the love. That's my dog. Hi, Muchka. From the fans, and it really sort of resets your devotion and your what's the word I'm looking for? So your sort of drive and your determination to do music. It couldn't have been more therapeutic and restorative and awesome for us. So
yeah, it was rejuvenating. We went from having what we saw as this maybe insurmountable problem of like, how do we even get this record to actually come out? Like, we had already made it, so we could put it out digitally and it would be a thing, but we really kind of wanted to have some physical presence and be able to actually get it into people's hands. And so at first it was like, well, can we even get the money that it would take to be able to press this, where we're not just pouring more of our own money into it and then maybe going to end up sitting on a bunch of boxes of records or something, not really having any sense of it. And so then we shifted over into a crowdfunding space. Then we can know exactly how many people wanted it. We would know exactly how many records we needed to be able to build, to be able to press. And then we started having the inverse problem, which is, okay, wait a minute. Now we've raised so much money through this Kickstarter, which was just incredible and blew us away. Now we've got to start thinking it through, like how can we give this back to the fans? How can we be able to, out of all of what they've given us through this drive to be able to get this record out, now be able to pay it back to them? And I think we came up with some really cool stuff. Like it really, there's no, even though we were able to raise a lot of money, there was no real moment where we're just putting a bunch of cash in our pockets. All of the money that went into the Kickstarter is going into kind of merch perks and additional things that we're going to create to be able to give to the people who really wanted to see the record be a reality.
No,
yeah, we're spending every dollar very carefully and spending every dollar.
Running the bank. It seems nice because, yeah, I mean, coming back and I can't blame you. As much as I want a stereo record, I get why you could get in the back of your head, like, might be left with a basement full of 3,000 copies of this album or something. Like,
yeah, nobody wants that, right?
Yeah, you don't want.
We've all sort of faced that problem in one way or another, where you're like, oh God, we overpressed, or we, whatever, right? Or your band broke up before you could really kind of move all that stuff or whatever, right? And so nobody wanted that. Nobody needs that in their life. But at the same time, like we just were so fortunate that we landed on a situation in which we could sort of tailor make everything to the sort of the whims and wishes of our fan base. So like, I feel like they're getting like exactly, I mean, it's just sort of voted with their dollars. Like, well, this is what we want from the band. And we're like, okay, let's deliver. And so it was just like perfect. We didn't have to guess what everybody wanted. We made a guess what they wanted when we made the music artistically, right? We're sort of like, this is what kind of floats our boat. And we're going to share it. And hopefully it floats your boat too. But and that response has been fantastic as well. But as far as just like sort of like as a product that we're trying to like share with people, like it just was so fantastic. And by the way, I really do have to credit Rory, because I was sort of the naysayer of this whole thing. I didn't have the vision for thinking this could work. And Rory was like, dude, come on. Like, and Rory, if there was, Rory, you told me so.
Well,
let it be known, May 15th, I admitted.
Finally,
Rory told me so.
Very satisfying to finally get that in the books. I was just super fortunate to have already gone through it, because I think, crowdfunding in general, there can be a little bit of a stigma around it, and kind of a sense of like, oh, there's those who can and those who can't do Kickstarter or something, which is totally not correct. There's really successful artists who are utilizing that platform in a really, really cool way on a regular basis. But my old band, The Impossibles, had done a 7-inch doing crowdfunding. And so I got to experience firsthand because we were in the same sort of situation. Like, we don't really want to pay to press this ourselves. Let's get a sense of like how many people want it. It'll be sort of an almost pre-order sort of situation. And that was so great. Like Jamie's saying, just that direct connection with the fan base to find out what exactly the level of interest is. And so luckily, I bet big that it would be a similar sort of thing for the stereo, and luckily I was right. Otherwise, I would be doing a big you told me so for Jamie at this point.
Be the other way around on here.
Right.
Yeah.
It would be an intervention, and
I remember that. I do remember that in Possible's Kickstarter too. And it seemed like it was very much like the stereo one, where it just kept going. Like it kept catapulting, and just, I remember it getting bigger and bigger. That really, like, within the scene, at least, I remember that being one of the, honestly, like, original Kickstarters that did, like, got pretty big and everything. And I've always liked that too. I feel like we're getting, like, it was very popular for a while, and then I feel like some of the crowdfunding, obviously it never went away, but bands are doing less of it and they're doing more of it again. I like that. I think that's the best way to do it. I think, again, it's like, realistically with a band, it gauges interest. You get to know as a fan, like, this is what I would like, this is what we can do, and you get to do crazy things. It's like, you can do things in there where it's like, hey, we also kind of have these wild perks if you really want, like, this or that. Like, that's all in there for all gauges. If you just want the new record, here's the new record. If you want something, you want all this extra stuff, I think you guys are doing like Zoom calls or shout outs, like different, I don't know, there are a bunch of different perks where it's like, if you're into that, like, we got that too.
Yeah, I think we were sort of wise to really throw our imagination, into this and be like, okay, well, some people are just kind of maybe want some physical stuff, and other people want to see some sort of performance, and other people want to talk to us, and maybe somebody wants to sit there on a Zoom and have, like, Rory and I talk about songwriting, or maybe teach some guitar parts, or something, whatever it is that you wanted to do. We're obviously totally game for all of that, so it wasn't like like sort of we had these sort of parameters about anything. But we're just like, well, let's take all of our skill sets, like, and our time and our energy and our love for this, and just, like, make them available in every possible way we could, and see what bites. And like you said, everybody kind of, like, sort of picked and choose what it was that they wanted. And yeah, we would have never, like, thought to, like, do some of this stuff, custom songs and whatnot, but the cool thing about what I think that I kind of like the most about how we did it is, we didn't just do this as like a resourcing drive to then go do our stuff. We actually tied it into the promotion of our record. Our record is out, right? And so we knew, and and one of the complications in all of this was the vinyl press times, right? Like, it's many months, and different companies have, the more expensive ones get them to you faster, the least expensive ones get them to you much longer, and everything in between, right? So we had to kind of gauge whether or not, like, well, how are we going to do this, and how long is it going to take? But we wrapped it up with the releasing of our singles, kind of like one every 4 weeks, like that, and just, it was a great way to share what we're doing before everything was concluded with it. So it felt more like a record release than it did a sort of a promotional resourcing of funds and stuff like that, So yeah. I'm really proud of us, and I don't take a lot of credit for it, because I was the naysayer, but at the same time, I'm like, I'm so glad that we did it. I'm so glad to be wrong.
And we worked with a company called Craft Services, by the way, that Steve from Punchline. I noticed, Anthony, you're wearing a Punchline shirt. Yeah. Steve is part of Craft Services, and they were also a really great resource for us with getting all that set up.
Oh, that's awesome. That is, and I mean, again, it's amazing, because the initial goal was like, what, 5,000? It really was not that high.
Yeah, Jamie wanted it to be 3.
Oh my god!
Because he was worried that we weren't going to hit 5.
I thought it was going to make $1,500, and I said, so I'll do 3. I'll go as high as 3, and everybody's like, shut up. We're doing 5. Like, fine, 5, but this is going to be I'm going to land on my face here, and then like 20 minutes later, I'm like, okay. I did land on my face, but from embarrassment, to my own friends in my band,
Did you wear that hat so you can eat it now? Are you going to eat your hat for Rory?
I actually was salting it just a moment ago. I thought it would just taste a little bit better. So
So let's get into the new record, because obviously, I mean, the band on and off, it's been like over a decade now since that, first reuniting to play that Fueled by Ramen anniversary show. I mean, the new record's here now, but like, I mean, were there thoughts between, in the last decade? I mean, was this the first time you were thinking of a new stereo record, or is this the first time it was finally like, you finally did it? Like, I mean, was there any talk within this time, or is that really this recent that you were like, all right, time to do a stereo record?
Rory's analogy or metaphor of the glacial pace of the stereo is not an incorrect or ill-suited metaphor. We started working on the record about 7 years ago. Wow. And the joke was, at least back then, was probably like, oh, we'll just knock it out. You know what I mean? Like, no big deal. Like, we got some songs kicking around. We'll just do this, right? And like, our lives today are obviously much different than they were 20 years ago, but yet we're still all in kind of different parts of the country, and families and all that stuff, and you're just sort of like, gosh, like, well, I can work on this much for this weekend, and then I probably have to kind of like, I got a lot of stuff coming on the next couple of weeks, and that just kind of kept compounding. But then we also sort of like, as this process stretched out, we kept writing songs, and like, we kind of were like, oh my God. And like, we got well over 30 songs that we wrote and not just like sort of like little, like, there's a riff, that's a song, like completed demos, background vocals, pretty good mix and everything of 30 plus songs, like really 3 albums worth of material. And it started becoming almost like a point of contention, like the rhythm section, Chris and Sam, they're kind of like, guys, dude, how many songs is this? Are you trying to like make it so that there's no more songs left to write? Like, what is the deal here? What is the aim for this? Like you're trying to get all your songs out of the system now and then just put out records forever, but it turned into kind of like, okay, guys, just cut it off. We got at least 2 great records here. Like, let's just make one now. And but then when we finally got down to it, it was like, okay, let's do this. And it was just coordinating everybody's schedules, getting them in the room. Rory flew out to Arizona to do some vocals. I had Chris come out and do some bass. Sam's in town with me, so we were able to do a lot of pre-production and planning before the drum days and stuff like that. So, but then the rest of it was sort of just like done here. I, like shut off the lights and worked on the record and, my little cauldron of sound. So
that's where the magic happens.
It's where the magic, yeah. Hence the cauldron. You need one, so gotta have all that stuff.
For doing that, writing so many songs, I gotta ask, like, for you guys to keep writing and them kind of have to tell you, like, hey, like, what are you trying to do? Do you think any of that came from, like, because you're writing songs for a new stereo record? Is there any part of you that's almost like the actual, okay, now we go write it? You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing in theory to write a new stereo record, but now you have to, when you're done with however many songs, now you actually got to go do it. Like, do you think any of it came from that, or it was like, like, do something? You know what I'm saying? Like, was there anything of that, or it was like, maybe, yeah, we want to do it, but it's still kind of scary to do a new record after all these years? Is that
so you're saying like keep writing to sort of prevent yourself from having to actually execute on it?
Do it. It's one thing to talk about it, but then to actually go, okay, yeah, more than enough songs. What are you waiting for now?
Well, we didn't want it to be bad, right? We didn't want a bad record. So, but oddly enough, a lot of what made the record was a lot of the initial songs, like certainly Rory came in hot with this stuff. Like he's like, I got a few songs kicking around, and then he like dumped a Dropbox on me of like 10. I was like, oh my God, well, that's like the record. Like, what am I going to do here? So I had to do some catch up, but we definitely had like these like kind of like a month where Rory and I were like, okay, we're going to write some weird songs now. And we, songs that were just like had no guitars in them and strange things, and which are still cool, but it was just like what the record is today was sort of like honed in from all of this stuff. And so part of Rory is a fantastic songwriter, obviously on his own, and could probably make a stereo record on his own with no help. And I would probably do the same. So it wasn't like there was going to be a shortage of songs between us because of just how like kind of naturally prolific we try to be. But I definitely wanted to get to the point where I'm like, okay, everything that I'm sort of like feeling, that I have in my head and in my heart for music right now, I wanted to give it an opportunity to get there so that I could like possibly contribute it for this record. You know, I remember thinking early on, I'm like, Rory's got these fantastic songs. And like, if I want to be on this record, I'm going to have to deliver this at minimum, the same quality that he has delivered. So, you know, and it's not like every time you go to sit down and write a song, you can just go, I'd like to write the best song I've ever written. Like, let's do that today. What, you know what I mean? It doesn't work like that. It's kind of like, whatever the thing that is in your fingertips that day is kind of the thing you end up working on. And some days it's a really great thing, and other days it's like, well, that's pretty good, but I don't know if that would make the record. So you have to kind of keep indulging in that process before you have enough stuff to really make what we think is our best record.
And in my mind too, I think there was like a courtship period where I was sending demos to Jamie, and like Jamie liked them and would maybe, you know, tweak them a little bit. And, you know, I would maybe send him some of the raw tracks that I had, and he would produce something that was a little shinier demo version of it. And that was great. And we did that for a while, but then Jamie kind of started like really cutting loose as we got further into it. And I think that's when we really hit our stride. Like you know, Jamie said I could write a whole stereo record. I could write a record of songs that sound like the stereo, but if it was just me, it would sound like The Artificial Heart, which is like the solo stuff I did, right? And Jamie's
Which
also
I love,
done,
by the way. I love that that record. But got some major league jams on that monster.
And Jamie also has a fantastic solo record. Both of those records I think sound good and have good songs on them, but they don't sound like the stereo. And the way that we finally got this to be a real stereo record is whenever I would start sending stuff to Jamie, and then he would change the key. And now this song doesn't have guitars in it anymore. Or the song doesn't have piano in it anymore, and it did originally. And I've sped up the tempo, and like
now it has accordion, which came from nowhere.
And by the way, here's a bridge that I wrote that you never even had, and that's when it really got super exciting for me, and like felt like a lot more collaborative and more like we were cooking with gas, because there was discovery for me for songs that I wrote, which is like such an exciting feeling.
That's neat. I like the
we.
Oh no, go ahead, dude.
I was just gonna say, there's a song on the record called "Do You Don't You" that Rory wrote that was pretty like buttoned up in a very specific way, and he sent it to me, and I was listening to it. I'm like, yeah, I can tell this is totally a Rory song, and I thought it was great. I really liked the chorus. But the verses, to me, I was just like, I just wish they were a little bit more sort of like heartstring tuggy kind of thing. And so I had this really wild idea. I'm like, what if I just take his vocal part and then I write completely new music underneath it that then marries up with the chorus, which actually was almost the exact same music as the chorus. But then we sort of had this little bridge section between them. And now, when I finally sent it back to him, I remember I had two versions. I had his version, which I sort of like did the shiny version, which Rory was, talking about. But then I was like, okay, and I also had this other version where I basically just took you and then put you on top of a different song that I kind of like started manipulating based off of what you sent me. And I wrote a bridge and shoved that in the middle that sounds like Paul Revere and the Raiders, Cherokee People. And like, this is going to this might be a little bit left field. Will you just sit with it for a few days? And like, I think it was like probably the next morning, he's like, dude, this is crazy good. Let's do it this way. And I was like, oh, awesome. So to what Rory's talking about, like that like, okay, you gave me this, like these ingredients and you thought you were going to get this, but I'm sending you back that. What do you think? And it just went from there. So.
Is there a certain amount a song is finished before you'll share it with the are we talking, could you share an idea, like just a voice memo where it's like, hey, here's like a chord progression, here's a melody or something? We kind of flesh out the songs a little more before sharing them with each other. Like, is there kind of and maybe it changes, but is there like a certain amount you work on a song before you share it with the rest of the guys?
Yeah. Both me and Jamie have worked as producers for other artists and making stuff. So we've both got the kind of like full setup to be able to make a complete song. I would say that the level that it got to before I would send it to Jamie would usually just be like, I want to have a verse and I want to have a chorus, and that might be as far as it goes. We never really, just sent like one riff to each other and built up from that sort of like
There was
real
always
basic version
context.
of it. Yeah,
like Rory would put a drum part in so that I understood kind of the feel or something like that, you know.
And that's where I really needed Jamie, because I don't have the drummer background that Jamie does. Jamie's a fantastic drummer. He played drums on our first record, 300. And so he could bring in like actual drum knowledge and like an actual sense of what should help to propel the song. So there'd be something in there, but I wasn't, heavily married to anything. And then, like I was saying, I would have just the verse and the chorus, which usually leaves room for a middle eight or a bridge or some other,
depending on what country you live in. Yeah, as the terminology changes.
I like middle eight. I put U's in favorite. I like to spice it up.
Actually, I've never said it that way, but it sounds fancier that way than a bridge. It's much fancier.
I got that actually from a British record producer, as like dumb as that sounds, it actually
so
is
for
true.
Your audience's knowledge and understanding what it is we're talking about, like we talk about songs, everybody knows what a verse is, everybody knows what a chorus is, right? But the section between the verse and the chorus in the States is usually referred to as the pre-chorus. Overseas, they call it the bridge. It bridges one section to the next. So it's actually probably a little bit more sensible to call it a bridge, right? But what we call the bridge in the States is that what they call overseas the middle eight, which is usually after the second chorus that kind of goes away to this other part of the song, which is usually a unique section of the song that doesn't happen more than once. The States would call it the bridge. Overseas, they call it the middle eight bars of something, whatever, and then back to the chorus, right? Anyway, so that's what we're talking about. We say these crazy terms, but it's funny because they do get interchanged all the time. Even in the same conversation with the same people, we'll flip, we keep jumping terminology. It happens all the time. So
there's some great middle eights on 13. There's some great ones in there. You wrote some very good ones. Does that some people, I've heard some musicians go, that's a pain in the ass because it's almost you have to like. It's another part of the song almost. You know what I mean? You almost have to write a whole other part. Like, I guess, do you enjoy making bridges, or is that kind of like...
Oh, yeah. It's the oasis from the song. And it's like, if you look at a picture of a building, you don't know it's tall unless you put a little tiny car next to it, right? It helps give you the sense of scale, right? To me, the middle eight or the bridge or whatever you'd like to call it, that is the sense of scale for the rest of the song. It's what informs you how powerful the other parts are. And sometimes it can be like more powerful or less powerful or faster, slower, whatever it is, but it's your chance to then divert away from the standard set of ingredients you've been sort of like setting out in front of someone. You think of a song like Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison, right? Pretty Woman's very sort of basic. It's got the riff, pretty woman looking down the street. And then it goes to that pretty woman, na, na, na. And that's a completely different song. Also a great song, and you get to just drop it in. It's almost like a little radio station within one song, And I've always thought of that song as like a great sort of prototype and example for other singer-songwriters or whomever to like utilize that as like, hey, this is a tried and true like maneuver. Like don't just like keep doing the same starting chord when you get to your middle eight. Like think about the relative minor, think about something else. What would really sound refreshing at that moment, and do that, or at least start there.
And I think in a band like ours that has two singers, you've got that extra lever that you can pull where you can just take a left turn, have the other singer pop in. All of a sudden we're Shakespeare's sister and we've got the second vocal style coming in. And then we can switch back to the original song afterwards. There's a couple of different songs on 13 where we do that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of our demos that did that too. Probably due to the fact that we were sort of doing this collaborative thing, and I would write the bridge to a song Rory didn't have a bridge for, so there was this automatic shift, But we would do that a lot. We're like, but like a song like Heather, Rory takes over the vocals, right? Mm-hmm. And then a song like Do You Don't You, I take over the vocals in the bridge. It's a fun maneuver. So
it's fun for us to guess what each other's lyrics were too. Whenever we try and sing the different things. Get a little natural evolution usually through that process.
Oh, that is great.
And then live, we'll flip a coin to see who sings what. You know what I mean? Like every time.
For going into this record, it's, like you were saying, the stereo hasn't put out a record since 2002. The Stereo hasn't put out a record with Rory since 1999. When you go into this new record, I mean, are you thinking of it with the mindset of this is a Stereo record and this is a follow-up and this and that? Or, I mean, are you almost going in as it's just something that you guys are all working on to get, you know what I mean? Like almost not in the way of this is a reunion record. We're just working on a new album together. Like what's the mindset when you're putting this together?
I don't know, Rory, what was your mindset?
Oh, that's so funny. I really wanted to hear your perspective on it, because obviously
I want to know your perspective.
I was only part of one of the three original Stereo records, right? So for me, there's this whole like return to the fold piece of it that plays into it as well, in addition to the passage of time element, where yeah, to me it that's what it feels like. It's like, okay, I'm coming back into the mix, and now we're making the fourth record. And it doesn't really feel that separated for me, but I was also absent for that whole period that the band was, you know, operating sans Rory. So Jamie, does it feel just like this is the
to me
next
it
step?
actually feels a lot more like 300 than any of the other records. Like, you know, No Traffic was kind of a particularly tough record to make. Just the dynamic in the band at the time was just so kind of toxic, and so like I didn't enjoy making that record one bit. Rewind and Record had its own challenges, but at the same time it was like it was to me that if I could recall, it was kind of like one of the really first major things I did in Pro Tools, which is like, you know, like a much more modern way, and kind of the way that everybody records now, you know, using computers and stuff like that. But I had come from the kind of the linear based recording systems of the tape and, you know, that sort of thing. So that was my first real foray into doing it that way. So that had its own sort of like, I was kind of almost lost in technicality making that record. But this record to me was like, it was like making 300 was, but a more sort of like defined, like, okay, you know, we're this much older, we're this much wiser, we've got this many attempts at making records under our belt, and Rory is delivering these like jams, and I'm going, okay, everything I'm working on from my producer side of my brain is like top notch. And so I'm constantly going, okay, how do I make this as good as it could possibly be? There's a really powerful melody in this moment, or there's a really powerful lyric in this moment. Like, how do I present this as a producer in the way that best reflects it? Don't always have the access to that, you know. Like sometimes I'm working with young bands and they're just happy to kind of be in the room, and they're happy to get to the end of the part without screwing up. You know what I mean? So you're just kind of like and that's fun actually, to work with people that are kind of just discovering music kind of early on. But this was sort of like, okay, everybody felt like they were kind of firing at, you know, they're bringing the A game. So I had to as well. So half of my mind was going, just make sure you don't mess this up. And then the other half, it was like extraordinarily comfortable knowing that we had all this material to choose from. And it felt unique. As a Stereo record, it was extraordinarily unique. As just any other record, it was my favorite to work on. Also sort of like emotionally draining, because I was putting so much of my mental energy into making sure that this was great, you know, because I didn't want to screw it up. You know, there's been obviously probably any producer will tell you, like, yeah, some days you're kind of just doing your best to make, you know, you want to make a great record for the client you're working on, but if they're not the best band in the world, or they don't, maybe they're a great band but they don't have the best music, you know, there's only so much you could do with the ingredients. If somebody brings you bread, cheese, and mayo, you're making a cheese sandwich. You're not making a pizza, right? You know what I mean? Or like a brick oven pizza. Like, you have to kind of do the best cheese sandwich you can make, right? 13 to me was like the whole grocery store, and I had to make sure that we made the best meal possible. A lot of food analogies here that we're going to just avoid for the rest of the time, because I'm obviously hungry. So
I have to say, for the record too, that Jamie put the most blood, sweat, and tears into this record of anyone. It was a team effort. It was a collaborative effort. You know, we worked together on stuff, but I mean, the amount of work that Jamie put into not only the recording of the album, you know, the songwriting, the performances, everything that he did there, But then since then till now, anything that you've seen from the stereo where you're like, wow, that looks a little more professional than what I was expecting from a band doing everything themselves, that's because of Jamie Woolford. Because Jamie has really gone above and beyond and made everything that we've been able to put out have, I think, be one step up from what it would have been, or maybe several steps up than if we were kind of, trying to do it without his amazing talents. On the previous point, I wanted to call out, Jamie, to me, this does feel similar to 300, from the way that with 300 we were exchanging demos in the beginning and then we kind of got together. I think one major change from my perspective is that I, at least personally, am not precious with things anymore in the way that I was back then. Like, I think when we were making 300, there was maybe a sense of like, okay, I need to own on to my ownership of this piece and this part and this thing that I did. And like, if this doesn't make it into the final product, then I now have less ownership over this song, or like I'm, not getting in my contribution or whatever. I think that's of those
probably a kind of a youthful thing, right?
Yeah,
I would probably echo that. I probably came in with like, no, this is my song. We're going to do it this way, and you probably were doing the same, even though we were collaborating, right? We kind of had like a rule, like my song, I sang. Well, no, I guess we didn't though. We kind of,
but we were like the boss of like our songs.
You're the like
you're the decision maker on this
producer.
one. I'm the decision maker on that one, and I think like that whole element for me has completely gone away, and it's all about the service of the song and the service of the album and making the best thing possible.
Going along with that, and it was something I was actually going to ask later, and it's kind of going to what you're talking about. And in the beginning, like not being married to ideas, hearing letting things grow, letting a song grow if someone has another idea and stuff. But something I was thinking about while listening to the podcast, I don't know how this has never hit me, but you're both coming into this as the front man of two other bands, obviously. I mean, I don't know if you were like both the leaders of Animal Chin and the Impossibles, but I mean, coming into one band.
Rory is the leader of Animal Chin. So it's a really complicated setup we have, but it just works.
Yeah, good cop, bad cop.
But like doing that and coming from two different bands where, again, I mean, I don't know if that was the case or not. I'm assuming both you were singers. Maybe you had the most control over songs and stuff. Was that a hard thing coming into a band where now you have to, I mean, you're both at the front role where a lot of times you're not. You probably just both came from bands for quite a few years where you didn't have that second. I mean, yeah, you had the other band, but you didn't have that second person in that same position that you're in. I mean, was that something that you think you had to deal with early on? I mean, I would assume some of it, like you were talking about the songs and kind of not being married to the idea, taking other people's suggestions. I feel like some of it might come from that, but I mean, I'm talking to two people from those bands. So
yeah,
I'd like your perspective and what you actually think on that.
I think that foundational problem is probably what led to me being kicked out of the band initially, at least in some respects. There were all sorts of pieces to it, but you're not wrong. So Jamie very much was the leader of Animal Chin. I very much was the leader of the Impossibles. And so when you get the two leaders in a room and then all of a sudden the monster has two heads and it's trying to maybe go in two slightly different directions, that becomes a much bigger problem than if there's sort of like someone in the driver's seat and then, someone else riding shotgun. So I do think that had some of the foundations for what would eventually kind of come to a head. And you mentioned the podcast. I'll just say the podcast is called Kings of No Hope. It's a 5-part podcast that I made about the history of the stereo, because while I was there for the first record that we made, I got kicked out pretty quickly after that. And so Kings of No Hope was a way for me to be able to explore the story of the stereo as we were leading up to making this new album that we just put out called 13. And we get into a lot of that about the dynamic back in the day, and then the eventual just friction that led to me being kicked out. I think maybe it seemed a little too simple on paper at first. Like, we've got two great songwriters, put them together. They're going to write twice as many good songs, and the band is going to be fantastic.
More is more, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
There's a lot of
in this case, it was
that.
more is moron.
Yes.
Oh, Yeah, I mean, I could see that being a thing. And I mean, also just with time, is like you were saying, I mean, you get older, you figure that out. It's like, hey, like this person, which also like with production, I'm sure, I mean, both of you, both do it. And we were kind of talking about your food analogy a minute ago, Jamie, but like with like younger bands and stuff, is it harder when they're not? Because I'm sure the younger you are, the less you've done it, maybe you don't take direction as well. Maybe you're still in that mindset of, what's this guy know? Well, he's your producer, he probably does know something. Like, I mean, is that
You
something?
get both. You get both. You get all across the spectrum. You know, like I love working with anyone that kind of comes into the situation going, okay, I don't know my way around this room, and so like, will you help me? This is kind of what I want to do, and I'll show you this thing, and like what would be the best light in which I can present my artistry, right? That's always the funnest because like I then become like the vehicle in which artistry can kind of happen, right? And then there's other people that go, look, I am the deciderer, and I'm gonna make it the way I want it, and I want to hear it the way I hear it in my head. And that has its benefits because I love anybody that's got a clear, defined direction. The problems that you kind of run into with that is sometimes with inside your imagination, anything is possible musically, right? Going from the bottom of the guitar to the top of the guitar in like a nanosecond is totally possible. You just fly my hand up and whatever, right? But in reality, things, physics get in the way, right? But audio is also physics, right? If you're trying to put like this really reverby Rhodes piano on top of a big heavy guitar, it's hard to hear both instruments with clarity, right? And some people can absorb that sort of like the interjection of reality, and some people don't. As a producer, it's always my job to kind of like slice the pie and make it work one way or the other. It may not always deliver what your imagination wants, but there's a way to do just about anything, right? Kind of lost the train of thought we were talking about here, but like
Jamie, as you're talking about this, I don't think we've ever really compared notes. I bet we could actually like come up with a list of the overreaches that every band wants to make when they get into the studio. Children's choir is like the top of my list. Like every band I ever
everybody
recorded
wants that, and they're like, it would sound so great.
Let's just get
even
a
on the
children's
wall,
choir.
Dude, even
like,
on the
maybe we
wall,
know somebody.
Yeah. I know people with kids.
It's an elementary school just down the street. I'm sure they'll do it.
Yeah. Like, okay, kids, now we need to double track that. Like, it's been 6 hours and we've got 30 seconds. Like, so now let's double it. You're just like, no, this is not happening. It's like they say in film and TV that the most difficult productions are with animals and children, right? It's just, it's nothing against children, obviously. It's just like the studio is a slow-paced, meticulous kind of thing, and it requires, determination and focus, and kids don't often bring that, So
I feel like after take two, they're over it. I don't think you're getting more.
I already did that. What do you mean?
Yeah, I'm not doing that again.
It's funny because I record my kids all the time. We make these songs for my wife for like her birthday and Christmas and stuff like that. And we have like near albums worth of material at this point of just like Christmas songs. We did some stereo songs. We did, all this stuff. We did a Cars song. And me being me, I'm like, okay, this is gonna be fantastic record production, and we're gonna do harmonies and double tracking and gang vocals. Like the last one we did for Christmas was like a 5-minute long Christmas punk rock medley, and it's insane, right? My kids, right, were like, I'm saying here, like, kids are tough to work with. They're all like, let me do that again. And I'm like, oh no, I thought that was pretty good. Like, no, go back and let's do it again. Like they're like I don't have much of a say because I'm dad, and it's just like, I got this. Why don't you just step out? Let me just take over the transport, and they're cutting their own vocals, and
like 4 little Jamie Wolfords in the studio.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Family.
I can't even.
But like I did a school project with Jamie, and he's like, I want to do that again. I don't like the way that sounds. I don't like that effect. He's all.
I love it.
Sorry, sir. let me fix that for you. I'm about to get fired from my own production.
Yeah.
Get kicked out of your own studio. Yeah. We don't. You can just go. I think we're good. We don't.
Yeah, I think we got this.
The guitars on this, I mean, in true stereo fashion. I mean, you have to have big guitars. I feel all the records do, but you hit it really well. I think the guitars on 13, nice and full, nice big guitars. What were both of
Thank
you
you.
playing on this? Like, was it mostly the same rig throughout, basically same guitar and amp for every song? Did you mix it up a lot? Like, what were your guitar rigs like on this record?
It was essentially, like, do we go into a technical thing? How technical do we get here?
I love this stuff. Get
Okay,
as
okay.
technical as you want, because I think people
So,
this will really like this part.
okay, so I use the Kemper Profiler,
Nice,
which
nice.
is like it's called a Kemper Profiling Amplifier, which is kind of like a computer that just deals with modeling guitar amplifiers. And I used this model. It was called, it was I don't even remember because I ended up retitling it, so I don't know what the original is called, but it is a Splon amp. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's kind of like a really boutiquey JCM 800, which is kind of my flavor of amp, but it's like a really, really good model of a really high end Splon amplifier. And then I would say probably 95% of it was my my Fender Stratocaster with humbuckers in it. Occasionally there'd be some other things, and there was a lot of stuff that Roy played on the demo that made its way into the thing. A lot of the clean little noodles here and there. Certainly from Rory's demos, all kind of like, if I didn't have to fix it, I wouldn't, or redo it. Like Rory said earlier, a lot of my big moves on Rory's demos were like, this is a fantastic song, let's speed it up and change the key. That was kind of like I almost had like a macro on the computer.
Change the key.
You're like, oh, it's a Rory song, speed up, change key.
You go to the most though? Like, is there a key? Like, was there a lot of like going to G or something? Like, is there one key you went to a lot?
I would nothing like that. Oftentimes it was like Rory would record the song in E standard tuning, but the band kind of works more in E flat. So sometimes it was just down a half step, Other times it was like, these vocals are too high here. Let's back it down a whole step. And then, and then it gives us this kind of more, like a more forgiving D major kind of sound, or whatever. Like every song was a little different. Nothing had like a specific recipe, but our joke is that like they had to go faster, and the key had to be changed. So some of the guitars would get retracked just out of the sheer fact that we needed to change the key, so the guitars would have to get changed. Yeah, no, I kept it pretty simple. My philosophy on guitar tracking is not to bury yourself in menus and tone and all this, that, and the other, but is actually to try to just really play it like right. I know that it kind of sounds funny every time I say it, but you'd be so surprised. Like, you can play a riff really great and then double it, and it's like, that sounds good. But if you really nail the timing and then double track it, something happens that goes a little bit past what any piece of technology can do. And like I always argue this. I go, it's never about gear, because if it were about gear, I love my mom, but if I were to give my mom the best Les Paul and the best amp, and right, doesn't make her play any better than me with crappy gear. Right? Like, it's about the player. And a lot of people, if you could just use YouTube as an example, it's about comparing this to that and this and that, these finely nuanced differences between whatever similar pieces of gear. And ultimately it just comes out of your hands. And so that's a hard lesson to learn, because it's like, everybody wants it to be, if I just buy the Awesometron 7000, my problems are solved. My guitar tone will be perfect. And it's never the Awesometron 7000. It's the Awesometron 8000. That's the one you want. No, but it's your hands, right? So like, but that's hard. That's hard work. And and that's old school. All of your heroes did it this way. Why would we be any different? Right? And I tell young producers all the time, don't like, you may have Pro Tools and that's your recording medium, but there's a button up in the setup or the options called destructive record. Use that mode. Yeah. And it's kind of like tape mode. Like, if you hit record again, it doesn't make a new thing. It actually records over what you just did, just like a cassette tape would, or a reel to reel would. And I recorded most of the guitars and most of the vocals in destructive mode. You know, if I was in something really particularly difficult, you know, like just some strange intervals, I might, you know, okay, I'm going to comp this together or whatever. But like for the most part, I just try to like be like, if it's not right, I'm not going to like massage it into place. I'm just going to play it until it's right. And there's a little bit of bravado doing it, a little kind of like check me out. I'm badass. I use destructive mode. But at the same time, it changes the way that you approach playing music and recording it. And it makes you so much less lazy about doing it. You have to get it right. And you just keep getting it right until it's right. And then when it's right, you can be so proud of it. And it just like stacks up all the things in your favor. So it also keeps your region bin or your clip bin low, and your file sizes are better, you know, all that stuff. So
got to keep those file sizes down.
Got drive space going up in price with the supply chain problems, you know.
Since we were talking about gear, I think it's funny. There were all these sort of like little coincidences that we were discovering as we were getting into this. Jamie mentioned that he recorded most of the things on an American Strat that he has. I have that exact same guitar. We somehow managed to buy the exact same color, model, everything Stratocaster. And it's not like I buy tons and tons of guitars. It was just, it just happened to be one of those things that we discovered. We both managed to buy the exact same one. And so it was just one of those happy coincidences. Also, I just wanted to mention really fast, since we were talking about like changing keys on things, if you listen to the record, you can hear some of my vocals are actually flown in from the demos, and then there's a vari-speed element to it. So you can kind of hear a little bit of that, like, oh, this is pitched up a little bit, or oh, this is pitched down a little bit. And I love that. Like there's such
it's like sort Beatles, you know,
there's that Beatles quality to it where it just, it
they
sounds
record at higher speeds, so they make their voice sound lower when it plays back, or oftentimes the reverse. Yeah. They record lower and then speed it back up, and John Lennon has a whinier voice. You know, we actually did some of that on Do You Don't You as well. We changed the whole key of the song, even though it was all recorded and everything, but when we were cutting vocals, we're like, we want the vocals to sound a little strange in this part, so let's slow it down. It has the added benefit too, then okay, well now I can actually sing a little lower, but then when you ramp it back up again, you get an almost like, you have to do it subtly, or else you veer into chipmunk land. You know what I mean? But like if you do it just a little bit, it just adds a slightly psychedelic kind of like, something's a little strange about this. I don't know what it is, but it just adds that touch, you know? So
yeah, your ear hears it and you have a sense of it, like whether it's conscious or not.
Which I gotta say I love, because sometimes when bands like produce their own records and stuff, like sometimes I'm a little iffy. I'm like, if someone says we're gonna produce it ourselves, I'm like, okay. But you are like bona fide producers. Like even just hearing you talk about the construction of a song or deconstruction of a song and like all this, I'm like, oh no, you're in good hands. Like I don't know that a stereo record would do any better by bringing in like another producer. I don't think, which credit to you, because again, sometimes I'm weary. Sometimes self-producing is not the way to go. If you don't think like a producer, or your other bandmates also can't look at you as a producer, like look at you in that role, I don't
just can't look at you. They just hate you. You know, it's like, those guys.
The way
can't
this
look
record sounds, I cannot even look you in the eye anymore.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, you did a really great job on my instrument there, Woolford.
And Jamie has a great advantage there, where he had already been engaging in production, and I think that role was really kind of solidified, you know, before even getting into any of this.
Rory, you should talk about too, like a little bit, like where, you know, because we talked about this in the last one, where we kind of had our little lanes for this project, right? Where you were podcast man and I was record man, you know?
Right.
Yeah, let's talk about this.
Yeah. I mean, so Jamie mentioned earlier, it took like 7 years. And so we started in 2015, we started doing the demo exchange. And then my role started to become more of like, okay, I'll send something to Jamie. Maybe he'll need me to do some vocals on it again. But for the most part, like the lion's share of my work in it had kind of completed. And I've been a huge podcast fan for years and years. And it's hard for me to be a fan of anything without wanting to also do it. Like it's just built into me. It's part of my DNA. And so I've always kind of wanted to do a podcast, but didn't really have any direction to go with it. And suddenly realized how interested I was in the story of the stereo and the way that this band I had been there at the beginning. I had like a front row seat for a lot of things that had happened to the stereo when they were initially getting some major label buzz and things were getting kind of exciting. And then the label that we were on, Fueled by Ramen, started to just turn into this behemoth. And you know, the very, very early stages of that were starting to take place. But then I wasn't on the inside anymore. And I would hear about things happening within the band and, you know, maybe get some of the high level drama, but also hear about, you know, the successes. And it really just had this feeling like it was going to explode. They were going to be the band of the kind of older FBR acts that was going to break through and be the one. And it just couldn't come to fruition. Like it never really went. And so wanting to find out what happened there, like what was the backstory there? And I knew I was super interested in it. And so I figured that, you know, it could be a compelling story. Once I started doing interviews with Jamie, it just took on like a whole new life. Like, oh my gosh, there are whole chapters that I had no idea about and really tell what I consider to be a really interesting story. You know, I was interested in, there was a documentary about a band called Anvil that I had enjoyed quite a lot. Great doc. And that sort of kind of slice of life, taking a snapshot where maybe there's an element, if you know the band, that's fascinating to kind of see like, you know, what was it like behind the scenes and what was the part that maybe I wasn't paying attention to. But even if you don't have that level of interest, just being able to see like a human story about people. And since I made the podcast and since it's come out, what I've discovered is that people really do have that connection. I've had people tell me that listening to Kings of No Hope helped them to work through the old feelings that they had about being kicked out of things or like being rejected out of something that had nothing to do with music. Just knowing that everybody in their youth, you know, has things that they go for and they try and they fail and it's really tough. And so like in just a really basic way, we can all relate to that. And so I found that a lot more people were able to connect with the story in ways that I couldn't have even anticipated. So it was really cool to have that, like Jamie mentioned, that track for me to work on while he was doing the heavy lifting and making the crazy guitar tone that you like, Anthony, on the record. I'm going out and doing interviews with, you know, Chris Carrabba or, you know, people who loved the stereo and want to talk about the band, or, you know, chasing down interviews with past members of the band and sort of bringing all that stuff together. So it was really an interesting way for us to be able to both creatively be steeped in the stereo for those years while we were putting it all together and getting ready to be able to put it out.
There's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of work in that too, putting something like that together. I mean, just the amount of interviews, it's very like well produced. And I mean, as someone who has to like produce radio and podcast stuff, I know how much time that stuff can take. Like it's even including with interviews, like because I'm listening to it going, even if you're just like, you know, for 30 seconds, you know, this person pops up and says this here, and then they come back later or something. It's taking you hours. Like who knows how long you actually interviewed them, the time it takes to write the questions, to get them on the phone, to even get everyone like all together and all that. Like
takes about 7 years.
Can
I add one thing though that I think is really important to understand about the podcast, which is the you know, the story that you most hear about bands is the one where they're crazy and they did all the drugs and they went to every party and they were found in the gutter and then they had to, thanks to a shot of adrenaline, they're now here today. You know what I mean? Like that story has been told a million different times, a million different ways by lots of really famous bands, but there's that salacious like opinion of what bands are, right? But that's literally like a 0.5% of the last 0.5% of all bands, right?
Yeah.
Most bands don't get anywhere near that, right? They don't. That's like, it's just like, oh, there's like literally a handful of people that have been to the moon, but there's a lot more than a handful of people, right? Yeah. Like it's such a specific slice of humanity that was able to do that at this point, and maybe more in the future. We'll see. Thanks, Elon. the story of the stereo, the Kings of No Hope, though, is like, it's the other story, the one that's never told, which is like, and it's not just like the local band that works in the, works hard in their garage and they got to play the big battle of the bands last week. Like, that's maybe not a compelling story, but the one in the middle, this one was like, okay, well, this band did get signed. This band did, get to make records. They did get to go on tour in multiple countries, and they did make an impact, but they didn't quite get to that other part. They didn't get to the moon, right?
Yeah.
And I always thought to myself, like, taking myself out of it, right? Like, gosh, I would kind of like, this is a more attainable goal, like, for like the significantly vast majority of bands than the other one, right? Like, everybody will probably on some levels, like, they, they grow up like, I want to be a famous movie star, rock star, whatever, right? I don't think by the time we got to the point where we were trying to do this, I don't think anybody's trying to be a famous rock star, but we wanted to like have music be our vocation, right?
Mhm.
But the problem is you're 20 or you're 24 or whatever it is and you're going, okay, I'm still just barely equipped to like live as a human being, in my 20s. And now I'm trying to like manage this thing that is like, there's no manual on how to be in a band, right? But there's a significant amount of opinions on how to do it, right? Coming from every corner of the earth, right? And so you're always having to kind of just guess your way through what's right, what's wrong, whatever. That story, the one that Rory told, was our version of dealing with all of that, warts and all. And we really did like try to make it so that it was like that as you're listening to it, we're discovering it too. Rory and I had buried the hatchet a long time before the podcast, just for our own personal problems, but we never really spoke about specifics. We didn't go back there. It was probably even still kind of like a wound that didn't feel like something we wanted to open. Like, we're good right now. Like, why talk about this, right? But we knew subconsciously that for the podcast, for the story of the stereo, we had to talk about what went wrong between us, right? What I did wrong, what he did wrong, etc., right? And we saved it for the mics,
Mhm.
And the good thing is, like, had we not done that, it could have gone poorly. It could have been like, well, I can't fucking believe you did that, but the mics kind of kept us engaged and got us through the moment. But it's all there for you guys to listen to. And so, like, I think that's probably one of the most compelling parts of the podcast is just two old friends going over some tough shit that they did and getting past it and moving on.
Yeah, I think so often people bury the hatchet without actually doing that. To actually like unpack it and get forensic with it would almost feel rude, or like people just want to kind of like move on and put it in the past. But I highly recommend it. Like, if there's someone that you like, things are cool now, but you had beef in the past and you've never really talked about it. I mean, there's so much catharsis you get out of it, and I learned so much. Like, Jamie told a story. My eyes are burning story, right? Was about me like screaming in
Gotta be a
Jamie's face.
t-shirt.
Like
Gotta be a t-shirt.
like the last night that I was in the band, basically, like when I got dropped off at the end of that night and I was done. I have no memory of that now, and I don't even know that it's ever been a part of the story for me in general, like thinking about getting kicked out of that band. And so you just discover so much whenever you engage with someone else's perspective and actually, get to try and experience some of it through their eyes, in addition to, whatever you've been holding on to.
Those parts where you're talking about that you kind of like, you buried the hatchet a long time ago, but you're getting into like, just really the grit of it all, like behind the mics. Do you think that made it easier or harder doing it in that setting, doing it, as like for the podcast and behind a mic? Does that make it? Because I don't know, like part of me goes, maybe it makes it easier, but then it might not, because this is for everyone. This isn't like just a conversation.
There's a level of awkwardness to it, right? Because we didn't have an audience. We were just kind of doing it like as we're talking now. We were in fact, I think we were actually talking on the phone, but we were just recording locally, like on our own systems.
Yeah.
It which makes it sound like we're sitting in a room together, which is great. And Rory, the way Rory put it together, it has that feeling, right?
Really well.
But we had been talking for probably several hours at that point, and I think it might have been like the second or third installation of the interviews with me. And so when we got there, while we were talking I'm just like sitting in my living room or wherever I was, and he was talking at where he was, we still knew that there was a future audience to these moments.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't necessarily put that out of your mind. And so there's an almost like, I wouldn't go as far to say there was a performance aspect of it, because I think if you listen to it, it's real. It's all real.
It sounds very
but
real.
but at the same time, there's an awareness that you're kind of in a room with others. And so I wanted to say things on my, be on my best behavior when I was talking about this subject, out of respect for someone I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and who I call a lifelong friend, even though we're talking about something that essentially at that point damaged all of it. So, and Rory was probably, I mean, let me speak for you, Rory, and we'll see. Let's play how well do you know your bandmate. Rory was probably going through this going, okay, I have an agenda of things I want to talk about because I'm the producer of this podcast. But at the same time, hopefully you're saying I'm glad to be back in the fold doing this thing. I'm making this podcast. We're making a record. And I do value my friendship with Jamie. So I want to, he's thinking about the audience surrounding this. I'm thinking about, at a later point when I put this all together, this is going to be a moment where Jamie has to listen back to this moment. And am I doing a faithful job of curating what he's saying and the essence of his apology to Rory and all that thing? So there's a lot that he's probably balancing too. How did I do, Rory?
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And there's like a whole editorial aspect to everything that kind of comes in after the fact. But it felt very real to me in the moment. And you asked the question, Anthony, is it easier or harder? I felt like it helped facilitate it. It gave us a structure and like, okay, you know what, we're going to sit down. We've carved out a couple of hours, our families are not going to be tugging us away for this stuff. And that's an element that I think you would have a harder time sort of like establishing if you didn't have some sort of thing that you're doing it for, that I think helped us get there.
That makes sense. That definitely makes sense. And it is like, again, being I guess of the three of us, I'm the only one who can kind of have that full outsider, experience of me listening to it as a listener. And yeah, I mean, sounds very real, and I like it too, because I feel like you give the good and the bad of the band. Like, I just feel like you give it straight. Like, it's not like it's all just terrible things or all good things. It's just, this is the stereo. This is how it happened. Like, this is the story of the band.
That was definitely, again, this was the Rory show. He was the producer. Like, I feel like, and Rory would agree. I definitely was like, dude, I know that it's going to be probably the best way to tell this story is to villainize me a little bit. And I'm okay with that, because that's going to make such a better podcast than anything, because, and I think it really caught a lot of people off guard, because I think they probably expected the hero story of the stereo, and then they got signed, and then they did this, and then they played the sold out show, and everything was amazing. And it's all thanks to Jamie fucking No, we didn't do that at all. Right. We're like, okay, this dude, here's how he screwed up. And this dude should have done this. And this dude then wanted to kick that dude out. And it was the kind of like we didn't tell the story of our band through the successes. We kind of told it through the F-ups, Apologies, by the way, if you have to bleep me out, I'll try to curb my
say language. All the fucks you want. I'll edit it out on the radio.
God, I finally feel free. No, but that probably caught people off guard, because they were like, whoa, this is like episode 2. And this is like this, like, I'm expecting to hear kind of the story about this like kind of like underground pop punk, power pop band that I like. And here it is, like this emotional sort of like discharge that's happening between these two guys. Like, holy smokes. Like it went to a new level for people. I know it did for me when I was listening to early versions of this, because I was like, I stopped thinking it was about us. I was like, oh my God, this is like and I told Rory immediately, I was like, this is great. This like feels like a documentary of just about people. It's almost like not about a band. This could be about just people that have had hardships between each other, And I think that's what made it resonate. It just was a realistic view of people trying to make a thing work and maybe not doing the right things to make that thing work.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say really quick, I know that not everybody came into it thinking like, oh, this is the Stereos putting out a new record, and so this is, you know, the big promotional thing where they're going to talk about how great they are, because there were people who found the podcast that didn't know that we were coming out with a new record, who were reaching out to me and saying, Jamie's such a jerk, it's really cool that you stuck it to him there. And I had to be like, no, wait. There's a lot more to this story. You need to hear the whole arc. And by the way, we actually have a new record coming out that I'm on. Just
awkward.
Let's be transparent about it here. But that, in a way, that's good, because that means that you don't listen to it and then instantly think like, oh, this is like a promotional device or something that the band is just looking to leverage to be able to get people interested in their Kickstarter or what have you. Like, it really did exist as this whole other storytelling that we wanted to do, kind of in coordination with the album, but as this, like, wholly separate element.
Well, I mean, I got to give you guys credit, just like I did earlier with like the self-producing, you being able to do it. A lot of times, including current day, bands will do like a podcast, like a promotional vehicle and stuff, which, I mean, even if I'm a fan of the band, sometimes it's just like, I mean, it's just going to be one big, like, you know what I mean? Hours of promoting something.
Patting ourselves on the back. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
we really didn't want that. I didn't think that would be interesting. And like, it's just, if anything, it would just feed into like whatever reputation I have, you know what I mean? like this guy was, like, what, enough about me. What do you think about me? Kind of, like, we don't need any more of that floating around. Right. And so I was kind of like, I'm a different, like, I operate at a much different way than I did when I was, insane, 25-year-old person trying to make my band my vocation. Now I have a different life and a different set of priorities. And so this, to me, was much more of the art of it, And again, I didn't have to do really anything. Like, Rory would kind of chime in with me and show me bits and bobs here, and I would give him my 2 cents. But I was like, just like I would with record production, I was trying to not take it so preciously or be so sort of like self-absorbed about the subject. I treated it like a piece of, like a project. And so I would tell him like, well, I would give him some sort of maybe clarifying information about something, because it didn't seem like what, in my opinion, like this part of the story was being sort of faithfully whatever. And he would come back with a new version. Like, yeah, now that I think that's more understandable. But like, and so my advice to Rory was always just sort of like, how do you make it better? Here's an idea I have, take it or leave it. And in every single time Rory did make it better, but it was like, I was such a sidelines person involved in the podcast, other than just like graphics, you know what I mean? Like it was the Rory show, and I couldn't be happier. But I'm like, almost like for a long time I was saying I'm more excited about the podcast than I am the album, because it's such a cool thing and it's so different, but now that the record's out, I think I'm kind of 50-50. I'm proud of that too. So not working on it helps, it's constantly worrying about it. So
yeah.
I mean, also the interesting thing too is when you think of when the stereo existed, I mean, obviously the internet and all that existed, but like, I feel like you were right before social media, where like some bands, like, I feel like your story's almost documented online. Like, you can go online, even if you just discover a band, you can kind of piece things together. Like, even as a fan of the stereo, there's so much stuff that I, like, not discovering you till 2011, I didn't really know. There's a lot of stuff that I don't feel is readily available or out there, which, kind of like you were saying, it's kind of big chunks. Like, this and this about the band, but like, you don't get the bridge. We'll go back to the bridge. Like, you don't have
middle eight.
Yeah, you don't have the middle eight to like bring it all together and go, no, this is the full story. Like, this is the whole thing. This, and this, but you don't know how everything connects and like all of that. So I think also when you existed is kind of nice to have that document all in one place.
And not only that, like my wife and I always have this sort of like this, it's not a joke, but it's like a sort of a reality about like whenever there's like, you don't know when in the absence of knowing something about a subject to people, whatever, right? Humans tend to interject like an assumption to fill in the gap of the lack of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
So like in the absence of information, people will always submit their own to understand a thing. And so that probably happened a lot with the stereo. I mean, I can tell you all kinds of, I've heard over the years, like I once heard something about me. This is actually before the stereo, where there was a show that I played where I was flipping out that the rumor was that I flipped out backstage because I didn't have a deli tray. And I'm like, what? And like, I don't even know why I would have been flipping out at this show. I wasn't, but like, I was like hardcore vegan. Like I was like, I wouldn't have been flipping out about having a deli tray. I would be flipping out about having a deli tray. You know what I mean? Like, so it's just like the weird stuff that just sort of bubbles up. Did you hear another one? Did you hear that the Jamie from the Stereo makes all of his musicians play off of sheet music? I have heard that several times. I'm like, I have never written a piece of sheet music for anyone in the band a single time in any band. You know what I mean? Like, where does this baloney come from? The deli tray.
Root cause.
Oh,
Yeah, and Anthony, you were mentioning that the story is not really on the internet. One thing that really doesn't help with that is that we named the band before search engine optimization was a thing.
Yeah, the stereo is not the easiest thing to find.
Try searching for the stereo and see what sort of stuff you come up with. It's not going to be a lot of
There's not much
info.
worse, you know, if we named the band like Cats or like .html or something like that, would have been like, that's about as hard to find as.
Yeah, not a Googleable name at all.
Not at all.
Nope.
Yeah.
For sure not. For you, Rory, I mean, again, you did an amazing job producing it and stuff. And I mean, I know you said you had like interest in podcasts and stuff. Could you see yourself doing, now that this series is over, could you see yourself doing any more podcast stuff? Be it, I mean, for one, you could do it even behind the scenes. You're very good at the like production side, but could you see continuing on doing podcasts or anything like that from here on out?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely daydream about that sort of stuff, you know, like getting, like you said, I think even more interested in just the production side of it. I would love to get into a project where I could take interviews that someone else did and try and build a story out of it and, you know, be on the back end. It is a ton of work. You called that out earlier, especially the type of podcasts that I like to make. When I listen to podcasts, I mostly listen to conversational stuff like we're doing right now. But when I wanted to make one, I really wanted it to be more in that sort of audio documentary sort of style, you know, like Serial or S-Town or Trojan Horse Affair, that sort of deal. I love that element of control. I love the fact that hopefully it's relatively seamless, but there are so many edits across that podcast that you would not believe, of just taking out ums and and likes and like
My fault.
the things, all the ticks that normal people do when they're talking, where I'm just trying to tighten it up and just make it, really sound really good. And so with it taking up that much time, it would just have to be, I would have to be incredibly passionate about something to be able to add it on top of my day job. And then, everything that I do with the stereo.
It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of work, and you're right. I mean, it's kind of an art form in the storytelling way that you did it, because it's not a let's talk for hour or whatever, and then we just kind of put it up. It's you're definitely taking that, and again, you might take an hour conversation or an hour interview.
Yeah,
you throw 3 minutes here, you throw 3 minutes here, you do 30 seconds here. And I also
and nobody that Rory interviewed knew what the narrative was, and none of us were like helping him with delivering like these perfectly bite-sized quotes that he could just slap on the timeline. He had to kind of figure out, after everything was asked and answered, how to tell the story. I mean, he had a good starting point with his questions, but at the same time, as he's mentioned, he didn't know a lot. He didn't know what to ask yet. So it was just like. I can't even begin to like that would be like me, like if I was making a record like that, is be like, okay, I'm going to record every chord at every tempo and do it and hit every drum at every velocity, and then every bass note. and then I'm gonna start writing songs, but using all the parts. It's like
And
it's
it's
just like,
tell
oh my
stories,
God.
all
all these
together.
notes.
Yeah. Like, and I'm gonna vocalize in every note, every word.
And one of my favorite things about it too was just doing it that way, and doing an hour-long interview with 12 different people, and then kind of coming back, is that I would get contradictory information on very specific things, and then be able to. What I loved doing was putting both of those perspectives into the podcast. So, in some points, I'm sure it probably sounds like I messed up and I like missed some sort of alignment between the two different stories, but really I just love hearing one person say that it happened one way. BJ saying that him and Jamie got into a fist fight at the last Animal Chin show, and then Jamie saying it didn't really come to anything physical, like right in a row, and just have those two perspectives and those two memories, and not really trying to like
Resolve
fix
it,
it or resolve it or anything like that. No like continuity police happening on my side, almost the opposite.
Which made it more authentic, if you ask me. Like it made it more like sort of like we're not trying to like rosy this up. It's like here's like that's what this guy said and this is what this guy said, and
some of these events are like 20 years ago too, so it's like you almost can't. It's like a couple of things are gonna be a little off. You know what I mean? Like your recollection.
We can agree that we were in this state when this happened. And we might have been at these coordinates, but after that, it's like
we might not agree on deli trays, but we can all agree we were there.
The Rashomon version of it is more interesting to me. Let's show it this way, let's show it that way. The truth is probably a third thing that
it's probably in the middle.
Neither
somewhere.
of those people said to me.
You find the truth somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But a couple more for you guys here, and then I'll let you go. For the new record, I mean, I don't know that touring would be in the books, but I mean, do you plan on playing some shows to promote it? Like, do you think is that the plan going on, or do you think shows and stuff in the future?
100%. I think all of us want, especially now having a whole album's worth of music that we're super excited about, all of us want to be able to get in front of an audience and share that and have that experience again. The logistics are tough. Just from a purely realistic standpoint, it is hard for us to be able to get into that one place. There is a huge backlog of music that from the time of the pandemic, where everybody wanted to be on tour and putting out records, and all of that got severely backlogged. And so we're kind of seeing, and that's great for audiences right now. Like some of the lineups you're seeing are just nuts, because they can put together these packages of all these huge bands that, we're waiting in the wings to be able to get out there. So we're continuing with a little bit of that. And then just, this sort of high bar that it takes to be able to get us together. But I would say 1,000% the Stereo want to play shows, and we will find the right show, and we will be able to play in front of people again.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, just for the comedy, we joke that like just
so
to
we
get
can
in the room
hang
again
out,
and just hang out and have fun, because it is a lot of fun to hang out. Like our band is like nowhere near the band that it was 20 years ago, or even 10 or whatever, right? Like we have such a good time, and now we have so much to like laugh about and celebrate, because everything that we finally accomplished. So I can't imagine that it's not going to be just some of the funnest moments, so, and love to share that with fans directly and have them hopefully like sing along with new songs and old songs too, but just be so fun. So
any songs that stick out in either of your heads is like would just be great in the set off the new record, ones where you go like, oh, that would.
I think Hey Jude is a popular song. People tend to sing.
People might know that one. Yeah, people might. A few people
you mean our songs? I'm sorry.
We actually, even though it's been a very long time since we've played a live show, the last time that we played live, we did play 2 songs. We did Kings of No Hope and 13.
Oh, nice.
Off the new record. So we've had an opportunity to share some of these live, and those
snuck them in under their noses.
Yeah, I know. Nothing. People love nothing more than whenever bands play the songs off the new album that hasn't even come out yet, which is a joke because people just want us to play our old songs. But those 2 songs, playing those live have been great. now there's this whole other laundry list of songs that I think will be a lot of fun. My Ready Arms sticks out to off the new album as one that I think that
One of my
will be a
favorites
ton
off
of
the
fun
album.
to play in front of people.
Yeah, that one has a nice energy to it. That I would say just the
It's a
energy of,
ripper.
like, as a fan or as an audience member. Yeah, I feel like that would fit in there, anywhere. But yeah. So I got just a few more here, and then we can we'll like where we get to the record and everything, where we can buy the record, where we can find it, where we can find the podcast. But oh, actually on live, and I wanted to ask you this, Rory. But I mean, I know you guys have played songs live, not on, off the other two stereo records. I mean, you learning those songs and going in there and you
Sure.
played them live. I mean, did
Yeah.
you know those songs before going in? Is this the first time hearing them? What's that like? And for you too. I mean, is that weird at all playing those songs live,
No, it's great. I mean, and I get to have, some input into what the set list is. So I get to pick some of my favorite songs off of those records. I was never, so hurt from being kicked out that I straight up like couldn't listen to a stereo record or anything like that. But I was a little salty about it, I would say. Like at first, when No Traffic came out, I was probably more
So
salty
you gotta
about
be
that
careful.
one.
Some of that might burn your eyes. You know what I mean?
I was not ready to like embrace and love that record, but by the time Rewind and Record came out, I actually started off, and I don't know if I've said this to you, Jamie, but when I first listened to Rewind and Record, I went in kind of wanting to not like it because I didn't necessarily want the new record from the band that kicked me out to be amazing. But it was, and Rewind and Record is just a fantastic record by
you.
several different measurements.
Fooled you.
The the songwriting on it is amazing. The production, I think, was just like a bar that no one else in the scene was hitting at that point. Like Jamie basically again showed that on an independent label, you can make a gigantic sounding record and put out songs that, for all intents and purposes, should be on the radio right now. And so, like a song like 1994 is one of my favorite songs off of that record. So yeah, it is a little surreal to go through the process of having Jamie show me how to play 1994 so that I can then go on stage with the stereo and play it. But it's also, I love it because I did love that song before we ever even got into that.
From my perspective, just to add my 2 cents though, as soon as we started playing with Rory again, I didn't have any, to me, there were no rules about Rory. There were just like, if we're welcoming him back into the band, and he's back in the band, he's going to just be Rory. Do what you would do if you had been in the band the whole time. There's not gonna have any. Well, okay, Rory, let's stay in your lane, buddy. None of that happened at all. At least like I never wanted it to.
Yeah.
The only thing I probably did say is like, well, if we don't play New Tokyo, they will not let us off the stage alive. Like that's kind of like it's one of those burden and it's like it's a blessing and a curse songs where it's like I'm glad you love that song, but boy, I have to play it for the rest of my life now.
Yeah.
You know?
And I love that song. That one was written so close to 300. It's very much in that same sort of pocket. So that was not a big stretch.
I think it's neat hearing them live too, because it's almost like this would be, I mean, like if you were on it, because I mean, I've heard, I think like on New Tokyo and stuff, some of the videos I've seen, you do backing vocals and stuff too in there. So you're throwing your own little, it's like you're adding Rory onto it, which as a fan is neat. And also that you're still playing songs off those records. It's not like a thing where it's like, oh, they're only going to play off, just Rory era stuff. So
yeah, no.
I like it. But outside of the stereo, you guys working on anything else currently? Anything else we should be on the lookout for? Is it all stereo right now?
Spiders.
Some stereo.
I cannot imagine trying to throw in like one more like project or something right now. I think Jamie and me are both pretty redlined at the moment, like between everything that has led up to this moment and then this moment like finally cresting. And so no, all of my time and energy that isn't going into my day job or my family has been 100% into the stereo.
Yeah, I wish I could be as more concise. I still am like accepting like mixes for bands and stuff like that. So I'm doing recalls, for protagonists right now. I finished kind of like a couple of songs for some local brothers down here or whatever. And, I'm always fielding kind of like requests to do record production of some kind, mixing usually. But I am trying to manage my time as well as I can, but it's difficult, but I always just default to like, oh, it's Saturday, let's hang with the family, let's go do this, let's drive up north, let's, so it's like it's a lot of life, so I can't even imagine like, starting some other major project right now. Just trying to keep your head afloat is like the project. So
Yeah.
And I've told Jamie before, I mean, if nothing else, this album 13 that the Stereo just put out should be an amazing calling card for his production work. I mean, I think it sounds phenomenal, and any band out there looking to just put out the best sounding record that they possibly can should hire Jamie right now, because he will make it happen.
Thank you, Rory.
Big and full.
And by the way, Rory is going to be directing the next Star Wars film.
Wait, do I look that much like George Lucas right now?
Yeah.
The plaid shirt and
right.
Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah.
Oh. So where do we find you guys online? Where do we find the band online? Where do we grab the new album? On top of that, I mean, I know in the Kickstarter there was like vinyl, CD, cassette, if I'm not mistaken. Are physical goods, are those still, can you still grab those physically if you missed out on the Kickstarter? Like, where do we find all this stuff now?
We have a very tiny bit of extra of the vinyl, but ultimately our Kickstarter was for Kickstarter backers, right? So our physical, what we didn't want to do was have everybody kind of come in and pledge to our band, and then buying like the vinyl package with the t-shirt, for like $250 or whatever, and then seeing the vinyl that they just bought with this package available for like $18 somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So we chose to limit the amount that we're pressing so that it was for backers, right? So they pledged big, and they're the ones that are getting the goods. Everybody obviously can go to Spotify and Apple Music and listen to the new record. It's available now. Turn it up and enjoy. TheStereoRock.com is our website. You kind of get to everything from there. KingsOfNoHope.com is the website for Rory's podcast, and you get to the episodes 1 through 5 from there. And we actually did it. Rory, do you want to talk about episode 6 at all, or?
Ooh.
Yeah, we did a live episode, a bonus episode to cap off the end of the podcast. Scott Heisel, our friend who used to be the managing editor for Alternative Press, he hosted it for us. Our good friend Jonathan London produced it. And we basically got the band together. We play clips off of the new album. We have some guests come in to talk to us. We do a game show, very ill-advised game show with confusing rules that make it go off the rails completely, but hopefully in a fun way. You can check that out. If you want to see the video version of it, you can see it on the Stereo's YouTube channel, or you can get it on any podcast service that you get the Kings of No Hope podcast on. It's the bonus episode 6. And that was a lot of fun to do.
It was fun. I was telling you earlier, Rory, yeah, I had listened to it, but I hadn't seen the video. But I probably listened to it a week or so, whenever it was released, I don't know, a week or so ago. Mm-hmm. And while it was great, the entire time writing questions for this, I was like, God damn, I hope I don't not think about it and start writing questions because of something like Scott asked. And I didn't even think about it because I was just listening to that. So hopefully not a lot of repeat questions in here. But I was in my head, I hope they don't start creeping in the back of my head, these questions. That's a good question. Well, you know why? Because Scott asked it 2 weeks ago. But
no, and we obviously are doing a lot of the records coming out, the podcast is out, so there's a lot of sort of press that's happening, and we always do our best to be not sound like we're recycling things. I mean, because there's a lot of fans that do sort of consume everything that we're on, and hopefully we're giving them a little something different every time. And and then that way, Anthony, you have something that's unique to your show and that sort of stuff. So
I love it. Yeah, it's something I don't think about too. Back in the day, you do radio interviews or whatever, you're not going to hear, not you can only hear who was ever around, or if you can like obtain that. Whereas now, if you can go hear 50 interviews from Rory and
everything's permanent, so
yeah, you go find it. So I see what you're saying there. But I mean, it's been amazing talking to both of you. If you're listening to the podcast, we're going to play a song or two. If you're listening to the radio show, we're going to play the whole record. So now that you listen to us talk about it, now we're going to play the whole thing front to back on the radio show. But either way, we'll start with track one, no matter what you're listening to. So right now, the Stereo, their new record, 13. The end is the beginning. Well, good way to end this right here on the Power Chord Hour.